Hello everybody and welcome to another Stellaris video. Today I wanted to share with you guys what I believe to be the top 10 Stellaris tradition picks, which are an important part of every single empire. This list will be mostly focused around single player, although multiplayer considerations will be made, and it will also be focused around the traditions available to regular non-Gestalt empires, as I do not play enough Gestalt to make a fair list for that. Anyhow, with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started with our first pick, which is Domination. Domination is a okay tradition pick, and I would not recommend it to be picked early into the game, but it could be pretty good later on. It has three useful effects, the first one being the finisher effect, with minus 10% empire size from pops. In all honesty, that is the reason I pick it in most playthroughs where I do pick it, but it also comes with a useful plus 20% leader experience gain and 50% counselor and 50 edict fund, and the 0.1 influence and official capacity from colonial viceroys. Now, this is not an amazing bonus, which is why it only makes it to 10th, and I would only recommend picking this if you're kind of stuck looking for a last pick and you don't need anything specific. It is also very useful if you're trying to get to 0 empire size, which can be a fun way to play the game. The next tradition pick is a fun one, and that is Domestication. This one, unlike the other picks on this list, is extremely powerful in circumstances and mostly useless in most other circumstances. It is extremely strong in multiplayer, allowing amoeba-focused builds to exist, which can really inflate your naval capacity power and allow you to produce basically all your ships from food, which is very good. I would not recommend this for difficult crisis runs, but it is very, very fun for trolling in multiplayer and subjugating the galaxy with enormous fleets in single player. The way I would recommend playing this build is, of course, with some kind of overtuned purity build or even Gestalt builds, and with hives and producing a lot of food in general. And yeah, it gives a lot of nice bonuses like this 15% boost to fauna ships, higher chance for rare fauna species, allowing for more powerful ship types, and is just generally very, very good for food-based ship builds. However, in most empires, you would not pick this, meaning I don't think it can make it any higher on the list. The next pick I wanted to go over is Adaptability. This is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated picks in the game, although it has gotten a lot weaker than it used to be. It comes with three kind of very useful things. The first one is one extra district on a planet, which is a small bonus, but is relatively important with how non-linearly planets making basic resources scale with size these days in Stellaris. In case you don't know what that means, basically a planet that is twice as large can produce 4 times the amount of resources in today's Stellaris, which is quite unfair, so even one extra district slot is pretty good for late game runs. The other really useful thing is enhanced recycling, which reduces upkeep for rare resources by 15%, which after the rare resource nerf in Stellaris 4.0 is extremely useful. The last useful thing is orbital bombardment reducement. This, when combined with something like Unyielding, can yield a really ridiculous amount of orbital bombardment resistance. When included with something like a planetary shield, you can get like a maximum of 90% bombardment reduction, which can be very helpful when playing defensive-based strategies, especially in multiplayer. But adaptability is even good in single player for the two things above. However, it is not as generally insanely useful as some of the things you'll find above it, and I do not pick it every single game. As an added upside, if you ever need to find terraforming tech and you just can't roll it in the society tree, you can go ahead and take adaptability, and it'll give you access to all 3 of the main terraforming techs via agendas, one after another, which can be very, very useful. The next pick is Discovery. There are 3 things that makes Discovery very good for me, and the most important one is definitely the extra research alternative. Having an extra research alternative is basically adding an insane percentage to your effective tech speed if you're trying to beeline for certain techs. If you're just generally trying to finish the tech tree, it's not as important, but when you're tech rushing, science division is extremely useful. In addition, the extra survey speed is very nice. In addition to it gives you an edict that gives you even higher survey speed. I forget exactly what it's called. I think it's like fortify the stars or something like that. It'll pop up when you get it, so it should be pretty easy to find. And the last thing that's quite useful about this is Faith in Science. Minus 20% researcher upkeep can be a nice little change, and all the other picks too are not that important. 10% research speed is nice, but in today's Stellaris, with the amount of tech you're able to produce in the late game anyway, with basically every single empire being able to get to repeatables by like year 60 or so, the 10% research speed is not game breaking, but it's a nice bonus to have. Harmony is the next best pick in my opinion, and the reason for this is Harmony is really useful in general when you get towards the late game in Stellaris because of the massive reduction in empire size, minus 10%, the generally useful plus 5% stability, and governing ethics attraction, minus crime, edict funds, and leader lifespan. These are just all slightly generally useful traits. And with the reduction in pop upkeep as well, it can be a decent boost to your efficiency of your empire. And given that you're kind of forced to pick so many tradition trees and there's only so many that are so good, Harmony will almost always make the cut in most of the empires I do play, mostly because of the empire size reduction, as most empires have an incredible amount of pops in the late game these days. So I always try to find a way to fit Harmony somewhere in my tradition tree. Unyielding is a tradition that got massively stronger in the most recent Stellaris 4.0 update, as previously this was always a good trait, giving underrated bonuses like Unity from defense armies, which could be combined with something like Reanimators for a surprisingly good Unity gain in the mid game. Defensive Zeal was extremely strong, just for defensive capability of star bases, and kind of made defensive playstyles viable, especially in multiplayer in the first place. However, defensive playstyles were always kind of weak because why build defense platforms when you build ships which can move? However, this has changed a lot with the addition of the Ascension perk, Eternal Vigilance, which is unlocked by completing the Unyielding tree. And Eternal Vigilance is extremely overpowered, as it can basically solo-handedly defend your empire against Grand Admiral AI empires, probably up to like year 40 or 50, or even farther than that if you want to lean into the defensive playstyle. And I reckon you could even beat Crises by only building defense platforms, Starlit Citadels, and that kind of thing. Not only that, with access to Eternal Vigilance, those defense platforms can be built for free of cost, although you do have to pay upkeep, meaning this is like the emergency button. You spawn next to Purifier, you take the Unyielding tree, you take Eternal Vigilance, and you're safe to scale. This is extremely powerful for single player and just as good in multiplayer, although you will usually get outscaled if you do not do something quickly, playing Unyielding in multiplayer, so it's even better in single player, to be honest, than multiplayer. Between 3 and 4, these were probably the two hardest picks to separate, in my opinion, and I decided to go with Statecraft. Statecraft is absolutely core to high scaling empires and late game power, as every single build is better with strong leaders, and it is basically trivial to get strong leaders with Statecraft, as the council agenda speed in combination with gaining counselor experience from completing agendas is extremely broken, and will result in extremely fast agendas in the late game, to the point where essentially all your leaders will be pinned at level 10 past year 60, which is extremely useful. I think Statecraft is near mandatory on most builds. However, I still don't think it is the absolute best build, as there are some builds which get leader experience in other ways. However, once again, this is a really tough pick. So, yeah, we definitely love the leader XP from Statecraft, except it still only makes it to 4th, and that really shows you the power of the traditions above this. Now, I would highly recommend that in almost every build, especially in single player, you dip the council agenda speed, constitutional focus, and amongst peers as 2 of your first picks within the first 3 traditions, as it is just so important to start getting your leaders leveling up, and you only need these two traditions to start. And then as soon as you can finish the tree, you go ahead and do that so you can get your Ascension perk. But yeah, Statecraft is mostly carried by constitutional focus and amongst peers, but shared benefits and immutable directives are both useful as well, with 25% agenda duration, very helpful for certain builds, and +1 effective counselor skill, leveling up the power of your leaders just a little bit further. Prosperity is my next pick, and once again, I had trouble deciding whether Statecraft was better than Prosperity or not, but please let me know in the comments what you believe to be better, as I could definitely hear arguments for Prosperity being worse than Statecraft, but the main reason that I think Statecraft is so important is 25% planetary build speed. Planetary build speed is one of the main limiting factors in Stellaris these days, as whether you go modular ascension, synthetic ascension, or even cybernetic ascension with augmentation bazaars or something like that, your pop assembly speed ends up so quickly you can actually build pops faster than you can build jobs for those pops to work, which is why stacking as much build speed as possible through standard construction templates or functional architecture is, in my opinion, extremely important these days. So I would highly recommend Prosperity as one of your first 3 tradition picks, basically essentially just for the standard construction templates. The other picks here are just nice small bonuses to your efficiency, minus upkeep, minus plus job efficiency and upkeep. And as an added bonus, if you're playing a mining station based build such as arc furnaces or something like that, this is a near mandatory take, as it increases the output of mining stations by 20%, which is a very, very significant amount. And yeah, the main reason I also have Prosperity this high is it is just such an important such a generally useful pick in almost any empire. It is really hard to find a build that specifically doesn't need Prosperity for some reason, so that is why it gets 3rd on my list. As we get higher and higher on the list, what could be next? And that is Supremacy. Supremacy doesn't make it to the number 1 pick on the list, as not every build wants to be a military rusher or a high military efficiency build, except for basically any other build that either aims to fight crises or other empires. Supremacy provides bonuses that are near mandatory. The naval capacity and ship build speed are very nice touches, but the extra ship fire rate just provides good damage. The ship upkeep provides, cheaper fleets that make it easier to maintain, extra naval cap size, and also access to the Supremacy tradition, increasing your nav cap even farther, is just extremely important all around. And hitting 10,000 nav cap if you're fighting difficult crisis is very, very important, and is much easier to do with Supremacy. And even if you're just fighting other AIs in general, you definitely want the bonuses from Supremacy. I would generally recommend this as the pick you take after you ascend in single player, except if you're playing multiplayer, you often have to pick Supremacy before you ascend just to manage your nav cap situation. Otherwise, you just won't be able to fit enough ships without getting ridiculous upkeep costs. So I would highly recommend Supremacy for basically every single build in the entire game. And the last pick is Mercantile. Now, why is Mercantile so strong, and why do I recommend it for basically every single individualist build in the entire game? And it is simply speaking broken. While it gets worse later on in the game if you don't build a specific trade-based build, Mercantile is actually strong whether or not your empire actually runs trade, as there are so many sources of trader jobs these days, and getting the bonuses from Mercantile are near mandatory to have a strong early game relative to other empires. The main trick here is trickle-up economics allows your civilians to produce trade, and nearly every empire will start with at least 1,000 civilians, and then taking adaptive economic focus can immediately make those civilians produce either consumer goods or unity. of course, you take the Unity for Unity rushing out traditions, you take the consumer goods, and this will sustain your consumer goods for at least the first 20 years of the game, allowing you to focus your entire economy on producing something else, and it also saves minerals because you no longer have to produce consumer goods with mineral consuming jobs. In addition, market efficiency and increased trade from jobs are crucial, and even when you're not running a trade-based empire with something like merchant guilds or anything like that, you get extra trader jobs, and every single build in the entire game will have trader jobs uh, from support zones on your basic resource worlds. And of course, the only builds that don't need any basic resource worlds are usually using something like Worker Cooperative, which once again benefits from Mercantile and the increased trading efficiency. I personally think that any build that can't take Mercantile as an opener will see significant difficulties, and I would love to hear your opinions on any strong builds you might have found that don't particularly need Mercantile opener. I've personally really struggled to keep up with any other non-Mercantile opener builds without this, and yeah, I think it's completely overpowered. And I don't even want to mention how good Mercantile is when you combine it with something like a Merchant Guild's Empire or commercial forums, as you can get some really insane scaling on trader jobs if you get commercial forums with the right megacorp traits on your planets. That's a whole different can of worms. But yeah, those are my top 10 Stellaris traditions. And very quickly, I wanted to mention kind of runner-ups or things that didn't make the cut that are also very useful. Enmity is very useful in some multiplayer games as allowing you to declare rivalry on 6 people and then get the unity from those 6 rivalries with the antagonistic tradition is extremely nice. You can also pull off some cheese things with like Eclipse and that kind of thing, which I've seen happen in multiplayer before, but I would say it's relatively niche these days as Unity rushing with Mercantile is so much stronger than with Enmity. Another good one is I didn't mention expansion at all. I see expansion as a bit of a noob trap, as most of the bonuses from this are just not that important. Starting with an urban district is indeed nice, but generally you kind of colonize 80% of the worlds you're ever going to colonize in the game in like the first 20 years. And 10% pop growth speed these days is really just nothing, with the likes of modularity pop assembly and cloning or purity pop assembly. My plus 10% is just not significant enough to feel like it's doing almost anything, and minus 25% empire size from systems can be nice for some empires, but it's not significant enough for me to consider it great. I'd say aptitude and archivism are almost useless, but not completely. Archivism could be fun for like some role-playing type builds, but generally not that strong. And subterfuge can be used for like some cheesy non-first contact builds, but it's just generally not that useful. Anyways, that's it for this episode. I'm very curious to see what you agree with and what you guys don't agree with, as it's certainly up for debate, and this does cater to my playstyle a lot, as this is my list. If you would like to see something like tradition, or not tradition, sorry, if you'd like to see something like ascension perks or ascension lists, tier lists, please let me know, as I am interested in kind of covering fun and kind of niche Stellaris content. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.